Hello and welcome to today's session. I'm Hima Kadia from TeckNexus, and I'm delighted to have Alan from GXC joining us today. GXC recently won two TeckNexus Awards, one for the Private Network Startup of the Year and the second one for Excellence in Private Network Deployments for Warehouse and Logistics. Welcome, Alan. Thank you for
Well,
joining me today.
thank you,
Alan,
and thanks again for the awards.
thank you. Alan, before we start our conversation, I would appreciate if you can take few minutes to introduce yourself as well as GXC.
Sure. Again, I'm Alan Proethus. I'm the CEO of GXC, and GXC is a turnkey private cellular network provider. And unlike other people out there who've perhaps taken a different approach, we've approached this whole problem as an enterprise-first challenge of how do you make private cellular as easy to apply for an enterprise as you do enterprise Wi-Fi. And so we have this incredible turnkey system that allows you to be up and running and not worry about gluing things together, but worry about actually applying it to your business problems. And on top of that, we're the only people in the world that have mesh cellular. So in places that it would be difficult or cost prohibitive to actually run backhaul, you can actually just have backhaul over the air with our magical mesh node.
Thank you so much, Alan, for that introduction. Alan, there are a number of private network providers globally. What makes GXE different?
Well, again, it's where I started with the turnkey concept and the mesh concept. So, I think when you start, like, first of all, this technology we're using, to be fair, came from the telco space. And so I think a lot of companies approach it as they would a telco solution versus an enterprise solution, where, hey, it worked great for Verizon and AT&T or Vodafone. Why don't you take it too? And it's a very difficult thing because enterprises who need to use this do not have rooms full of telco engineers to run this. The TCO has to be much lower, and they don't want to really spend time doing a lot of integration because you don't get value out of doing the integration. You get value out of actually applying the system to solve very specific pain points. The other thing is that someone from a typical telco background doesn't really have a deep understanding of enterprise networking or enterprise connectivity or enterprise end solutions or IoT solutions. They typically, again, think of it very, very differently. And so, because we're architected from the ground up for enterprise, because our company is filled with people with a massive amount of enterprise technology and enterprise networking backgrounds. And then finally, as I like to joke, no one puts up a private cellular network because it smells good or anything. They put it up because it's connected to an actual connected problem. And we have some very, very deep IoT experience from low data to high data IoT applications that can often, we're not in the solutions business, that's really what our partners do, but we can often help coach an enterprise when they're getting started on how to think about the solution side of really how they're going to use the network to make their business better.
Alan, GXE has been using CBRS across number of deployments.
Mhm.
What's your view on the current state of market, specifically in terms of CBRS?
Well, CBRS is doing okay if the big telcos want to grab the spectrum back and just do it the old-fashioned way of licensing it, which they've been making some noise lately. But it sort of goes against free market capitalism in a lot of ways. In that, with CBRS, I think it's been an incredible innovation and an incredible boon to the U.S. market. In terms, you have 150 megahertz available to use to promote, really digital transformation, AI, all these big exciting buzzwords people always talk about. And what people forget to talk about is, well, guess what? None of this actually happens with the level of connectivity we have today. You need private cellular to make all this happen. And so, new technologies, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if we're talking about the original phones from Alexander Graham Bell 100 years ago. They're sort of slow and steady in the beginning, and then they really start to take off when they hit a critical penetration point. We saw the same thing with everything from email to fax machines. And I think we're just sort of at the finishing part of that first adoption phase where people get their head around, oh, it's cellular, but it's my cellular. And so I think we've seen a really big pickup in growth in 2024, and I think this growth is going to become even faster in 25.
Mhm.
And I think what drives all these applications are really two things. It comes down to connectivity coverage, where you need it, And it comes down to security and the demands for a solution that really addresses both those challenges are becoming more acute every year.
So CBRS is specifically in terms of US markets. How do you see the private networks deployment in US compared to the international market?
I think on the US side, probably started with a much heavier 4G LTE um, as a starting point with their solutions. And I think that's starting to change where you're seeing a lot more interest in 5G. Of course, everyone that comes to you says, I need a 5G network. That's great. We can do that. We do that all day long. We won multiple NTIA awards last year for doing 5G. But what are you using it for? And when you dig down into understanding the problem that's trying to be solved, in the past 2 years, I'd say 80-90% of the time, LTE was the right solution to solve that problem, especially from a cost performance advantage, because 5G is still a couple times more expensive for the hardware. But that's changing very quickly. And when you go to Europe or other markets, I think they're much more a 5G first market, which we love because we do so much good stuff with 5G. And especially, we support conventional 5G, and not to get too technical, but I know you have a great background in this stuff, Hema. We certainly fully support 5G G Node B, but part of our special sauce is the extensive support we have for 5G O-RAN. We really don't know of anybody doing enterprise first 5G O-RAN the way we are. It gives you over twice the performance of a 5G G Node B situation. And so it actually supercharges a 5G deployment. And it's very price competitive with G Node B, and those prices are dropping quickly because it's more of an open standard that many people are using both in public and private networks. So in Europe, we've seen a massive uptick in business. We've had some large announcements with partners in both the UK and the Netherlands. You'll see some additional announcements coming out next year around some of the upcoming projects we have there. But we have some new projects coming up too. You'll hear more about next year in places like Australia. In applications from mining to agriculture to other industrial and enterprise. So we see while CBRS was sort of the spark to get things started here in US, because our system is so flexible and open, we really don't care that much about which band people happen to be using. Again, it comes down to what's the business problem we're trying to solve and how can we help you solve it faster?
So are there specific verticals that GXC is focusing? And what's your view into which verticals are faster at adopting private networks and any specific use cases?
Yeah, well, of course, the best vertical to be in is the one that's buying your stuff, right? But um, there's no technical limitations to what we could do in terms of industry, and I think there's a couple that are really shining. I'd say the industrial enterprise segment in general is probably showing the most aggressive deployments now. And then if you dig down on that a little bit more, we've seen an incredible uptick. Like one of the things we've seen is around autonomous vehicles, both inside and outside. And so on the outside basis, we have one wonderful customer of ours who, tried to do autonomous construction equipment using Wi-Fi networks. And in some cases, they put out a couple dozen Wi-Fi access points, but Wi-Fi really doesn't go very far outside, has huge latency issues, other things. And again, Wi-Fi is great for what it's good for, but it's one thing to try to take a baby monitor technology and use it for controlling construction equipment across large distances. And so we replaced that Wi-Fi deployment with just two cellular access points, and they can run everything because of the coverage you get, because of the low latency, because of the security. And so we've seen a massive uptick in the outside autonomous side this year. But we're seeing a lot in mining, and we're seeing a lot more and more in commercial construction. And I think agriculture is still a great segment for us, but ag is a little bit slower this year because their fate is so tied to the cost of capital for major equipment. So they're still chugging along, but probably not at quite the same rate, simply because of some of the larger macroeconomics going on right now.
So coming to your recent private network deployment at a poultry farm, which was focused on warehouse and logistics, can you elaborate on some of the key considerations, some of the challenges, some of the use cases, and any partner ecosystem that you leveraged?
Yeah, well, when you think about these types of food ecosystem deployments, especially like with animal production, whether it's chickens, whether it's cattle or whatever it is. Typically they happen over wide areas. People don't realize too that the food chain of the US is one of the most targeted areas by international hackers that exist. And I never knew this before the last couple of years too, that actually domestic people want to try to hack in and get some kind of embarrassing video. International folks just want to disrupt our food chain. So security is really big with the food chain people. And then if you look at on a more tactical level, these environments, whether it's a poultry farm or whether it's a cattle or anything else, they tend to be in areas where it's not like it's next to your house where you live, right? It's in a more remote area where typically there's not going to be great coverage, and especially both inside and outside buildings. And then finally, if you think about how manual it can be to sort of just manage physical things like this, they're really big on being prepared for more and more automation. And again, you really can't do that automation with private cellular. So all the trends and all the priorities that these food production facilities have really align themselves really, really well with private cellular. And then on top of that, I'll just mention I'm going to sound like a late night professor now, but demographic wise, we know there's smaller and smaller younger working populations. And again, those kind of jobs in these places are typically done by that demographic. And um, so again, because there's not as many people, it's hard to find people, and you have to rely on more and more automation. And I think we're just at the very beginning of that trend line.
Thank you, Alan. And then moving on to our last question. With the recent acquisition announcement, how does that support GXC future plans?
Well, it's actually fantastic because if you think about the customers that we're trying to get to, it's really industrial, enterprise, agriculture, those kind of things. And you think about what Motive has, they have some of the biggest names. I think they provide their services to over 17,000 warehouses alone in North America. And they have over 6,000 customers in general. And these customers are a lot of the people we want to reach in industrial and enterprise and logistics. And so it's one thing, and we've had good success doing this, knocking on the door and saying, "Hi, we're GXC, we're here to help you." But when you already are doing business with these people for years, and this is just one more thing you could provide, it makes a much easier path to adoption. But the whole reason this was triggered was Motive didn't wake up one day and said, "I think I need a private cellular company." It was their customers coming to them and
Mhm.
saying, you know, we need this private cellular stuff. Can you give it to us? And if you think about the logistics footprint they have in a warehouse, for instance, in tens of thousands of warehouses, just as we talked about autonomous vehicles being critical for outside stuff, whether it's commercial construction or ag or food production, they're equally critical for inside the warehouse. So forklifts. For instance, Motive puts those, almost 70% of all forklifts in America now are electric, by the way. They're not propane anymore to meet environmental standards. And they provide the batteries, they provide the charging infrastructure, all kinds of other things. They're just fantastic at doing that. But what's the next thing then? When you have the forklift and all the energy management, their customers are saying, "Hey, I want to automate as much of this stuff as possible. Can you help me?" Well, helping them involves having a private cellular solution because you can't do it without it. And so it's a really great match in terms of customer access and matching up with the customer needs that are being really expressed in Motive every day of the week.
Thank you so much, Alan, for taking time to talk to me. Before we wrap up, I would like to understand if there is anything else that you would like to add, and also any predictions that you have for the coming year.
Wow, I usually don't do New Year's predictions till December, so you're getting the jump on me. But I really think whether we like it or not, I think we put all. I mean, while we might disagree on the reasons, I think we could probably agree that the world's becoming a little more or less stable place over the last number of years. And I think it drives increased security concerns. And I think that's going to help accelerate private cellular. Okay, we don't wish for these things, but that's the world we live in. And I would also say, just because of demographic trends I was talking about, the efficiency demands of the market, I think that's a positive tailwind for private cellular. And then I think the other thing I would mention is, the U.S. government is the largest private enterprise in the world, and they originally, about 3-4 years ago, had a large batch of experimental 5G projects, and I think they struggled with the long-term direction, but there's a lot of chat coming back now that they're a bit smarter from the last projects, and the technology has evolved, where there's an incredible amount of chatter from the US government, not just DoD, but a government in general, about how 5G and private cellular can really be an enabler of efficiency, be an enabler of security, and be an enabler of modernization. And so I think we're going to see some very interesting things on that side of the fence come out over the next year.
Thank you so much, Alan. I really appreciate your time and looking forward to speaking with you soon. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you.